Hello everyone and welcome to a really wild game from round 1 of the Steinitz Memorial. And now Steinitz Memorial is the second leg of the five-legged tournament, basically a series of tournaments that is the Magnus Carlsen chess tour. So basically like the Grand Chess Tour, only online and with the prize fund of $1 million. So the first tournament, Magnus Invitational, was only the first leg. Then we have the Steinitz Memorial. This game is a part of that. Then we have the Lindores Abbey Rapid Tournament. Then the Chess Legends Tournament, who I have no idea what is. Maybe some chess legends will join them. Of course, in fifth is the grand final or something like that. But yeah, it's really an interesting game. But before that, I would just like to congratulate everyone for playing the arena yesterday. Here are the winners of the Meadow Arena: Abu Bakar, Matigets, and Lightning XQ, followed by Steve Max, Vavu93, Korobite, Nasty Discoveries, Good Handle, Ray the Necromancer, Shigs95, and Amarnada, and also the winners of the main event, the AGADMATOR Friday Arena, Kaldash90, that's FIDE Master Kamil Plichta from Poland, Super GM1 from Serbia, and Michael 2002, that's Michael Jakrlin from Croatia. So congratulations, guys. Followed by ATH441, Medio, Shatak, Cyclonite, Travis Nemata, Hohaus, and Varad45. So congratulations everyone for participating and winning. And now we go to the game. But also today I will be premiering my podcast with Maxim Vashela-Grav. So if you're interested in checking it out, I will put a link to it in the description below. It's the first thing you will see. It's some 2 hours long, so if you don't have the time, you can always check it out later. And after the game, Maxim and I played one Blitz game, and I also made a separate video on that, but that video will become available as soon as the podcast finishes premiering, and the link to that will also be in the description of the podcast, but you will also receive a notification if you are subscribed. So that being said, let's check out this game. Magnus versus Peter Svidler, and Magnus for his first move, as the thumbnail suggests, goes 1c3. Now, Magnus didn't just play 1c3. Magnus also announced it a few days ago on Twitter, saying that my boy Polborta is Svidler's handle on Twitter, better be ready for 1c3 e5, c4 knight f6, knight to c3 b4, and h4 in the first round. So it's as if Magnus issued a challenge saying that he will play that, and if Svidler wants to rise up to the challenge, he has to follow those moves. And indeed, Svidler followed those moves. So we have c3, e5, and now Magnus just goes c4, so basically giving black the move, as you could have just gone, of course, c4 right away. And now knight to f6, and black will have a significant lead in development due to this, one move handicap. Knight to c3 with bishop to b4, and now already Svidler has a knight out, a bishop out, the pawn is nicely on e5, and Magnus goes for h4 here. Now there actually is one game in the database where g3 was played, but here h4 is a new move, so already as of move 4 we have a completely new game. Now Svidler castles here, and we have e3 by Magnus, preparing d4, we have c6, Svidler wants to get the d5 in, and now the immediate g4, starting the attack on the king's side. Svidler says, okay, I'm not really interested in that. He just continues with d5, strikes in the center, and we have g5 by Magnus, dislodging the knight from f6, knight to e8, and now just a3, asking, do you want to capture, do you want to go to a5 and maybe c7, or do you want to go back to e7? Svidler decides to go back to e7, and now as d4 is definitely coming, Magnus trades on d5, captures, and then pushes d4 himself. We have e captures on d4, e captures on d4, and now knight to c6, continuing development, and now bishop to g2, puts pressure on the d5 as now it's attacked twice, so Svidler defends it, knight to c7, and now knight g to e2, preparing to go to f4 or g3, depending on what black plays. So here as Svidler continues development, we have bishop to f5, and now it's a good opportunity to get the knight to g3 as the bishop on f5 is undefended. And you can't go to g6. If you go to g6, then h5 is just too strong. You're going to have to go back or something, and then after the bishop is captured, you can go d5, and it's just a really, really great position for white. And the black e-pawn is even helping you avoid any threats along the e file. So instead, bishop back to e6 by Svidler, and now we have castles by Magnus. And now comes queen to d7, developing the queen, also keeping an eye on the f5 square, as white would definitely enjoy playing f4, f5. So bishop to f4, Magnus also continues development, and rook a to d8. We have rook to e1, and now rook f to e8. So both black and white finish development. Magnus still needs to get the a1 rook into the game. So that's why queen to d3, a3 has been played, so you don't have to worry about knight b4, and now the rook is also coming into the game. Svidler goes bishop to d6, puts pressure on the bishop on f4, and Magnus defends it with knight to h5. But now Svidler goes for bishop to g4, now attacking the knight. And now, how do you defend against this? Well, Magnus finds a very interesting idea. Rook captures on e8 with check, rook captures, and now bishop captures on d6. We have queen captures on d6, and now queen to g3, as Svidler's queen on d6 is unprotected, so there's a double attack now, and you have to trade, or you can just go back to defend the bishop, but then the knight can just go back to f4. So here Svidler goes for the trade. We have captures, and now knight captures on d4. So we have a trade of pawns in the center, knight captures on d4, knight captures on d5, knight captures on d5, and bishop, sorry, that's not a bishop, bishop captures on d5. And we get this endgame where it's a bishop against a knight, with a bishop against a knight and two rooks, with 2 pawns on the queen side each and 3 pawns on the king side each. With Carlsen's pawns on the king side being a bit more advanced. However, it's hard to decide if this is a plus or a minus with black's nice control here and the rook being able to enter the game. Black should be somewhat better. So here, Svidler not interested in defending the pawn, he starts improving the position of his king. So Magnus grabs it, but it's only temporary, because rook to b8, Magnus has to go back, we have bishop to e4, and now rook captures on b2. Rook to c1, finally the rook enters the game, and now, of course, you have to see if this check is doing anything, not really, as the bishop covers c8, so we have just rook to b3, going after the pawn here, but now rook to c4, going after the knight. So here Svidler trades, well, not trades, but he goes for knight to f3 check, and Magnus decides to capture it. We have bishop captures, and now knight to f5. So it's a bit dangerous for both sides, but the problem is after rook b1 check and the rook h1 check, the white king can escape to g3. And now with the e7 square covered, Svidler has to be very careful about rook to c8 checkmate. So of course he starts bringing the king further into the game. King to e8 and now rook to c7, putting pressure on the a7 pawn, also threatening knight d4, knight d6 check to pick up the f7 pawn. So here we have bishop to d5 guarding f7 pawn, but now you part with the g7 pawn. So knight captures on g7 with check, king to d8, and now rook to c5, going after the bishop. Svidler goes back, bishop to b7, and now rook to a5, defending and attacking on a7. And here Svidler finds a very nice idea, rook to h3. Which threatens checkmate, but also if you defend checkmate, you can also lose the h4 pawn. So Magnus quickly goes king to f1, and Svidler grabs the pawn. Rook captures on h4, and we have now rook captures on a7, which is a deadly mistake. Here rook captures on a7 completely blunders the game for Magnus, and the game is now lost. So feel free to pause the video and try to find the move that wins the game for Svidler while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting the mating pattern, and for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's bishop to f3, and it's unavoidable to get mated with white. The problem is there's a rook to h1 checkmate. The bishop covers g2 and e2, and you might be thinking, but I just go king e1 and there's no mate. Well, you would be wrong, because then rook d4, and now bishop still covers e2 and d1, and rook to d1 is now an unstoppable mate. There's no defense against this. Even if you go to f1, it's still checkmate. So it's a really cool idea, which now that you know, you should remember it, and you might spot it in your own game. So just bishop f3, and if the king escapes, then you just rook d4, and there is no escape. However, after this rook captures an a7 move, Svidler played king to c7. He missed the idea, and now Carlsen is back in the game. He plays rook a5, and now the problem is the same idea no longer works. If bishop f3, you're gonna go king e1, and rook d4 is met with rook c5 check, and then you defend with rook to c1. So the mating pattern no longer exists. However, it would give black a very nice position. Svidler instead goes for h6. And we have g captures on h6, rook captures, and rook to f5 now. Not c5, rook to f5 now, going after the f7 pawn. Bishop to a6 check, we have king to e1, and now rook to h3, going after the a3 pawn. This way, we have rook captures on f7 with check, king to b6, and now f3, blocking the rook's attack towards the pawn. Rook to h1 check with Svidler, now shifting the rook over to the queen side, king f2, and now rook all the way to a1. We have rook f6 check, king to a5, and now rook captures on a3. First knight e6, and rook captures on a3, so Svidler wins the pawn, and now it's 1 pawn against 0 pawns. So can Magnus make use of his extra pawn? We have knight to d4, preparing to bring the king into the game and start pushing the passed pawn. Bishop to c4, and king to g3 now. We have king to b4. Svidler also has to bring his king closer to the action. And here, Magnus returns the favor. Here, white is completely winning. I'm sure you see how. Without pausing the video, but it's a 3+2 minute blitz game, so of course when both players are very low on time, you don't expect Svidler to make a mistake like this. So knight c2 just picks up the rook and it's game over, but Magnus returns the favor and he misses it. He plays king to f4, just wants to get his king further up the board to start pushing the pawn, and now king c3 by Svidler. We have king to e4, and now rook to a8. We have knight to c6, and now bishop to e2. Now, the idea is that, there's always danger of sacrificing the bishop for the pawn, so white will be unable to checkmate you. So f4, and now rook to a4 with check. We have king to e5, and now bishop to f3. Putting pressure on the knight, we have f5. Magnus continues to push the passed pawn, and now rook a6 with a double attack on the knight here. Magnus goes knight to d4, and now comes rook captures on f6. Saying that if king captures, I'm just gonna capture the knight, put my bishop here, and when your pawn reaches f7, I'm just gonna give up my bishop for the pawn, and it will be a draw by insufficient material. So we have knight to b5 check. Magnus tries to keep some pieces into the game, but king to d2. We have king captures on f6, and now comes bishop to g4, and there are no more ways to continue this game, as next move Svidler will just pick up the f5 pawn, and it's a draw. So king to e5 was played by Magnus, and Svidler just played bishop captures on f5, and it was in this position that the players agreed to a draw. So really wild game. Magnus issuing the challenge a few days prior to the actual game. Svidler accepts the challenge, and it's a really crazy game. Svidler had a forced mate in 7 with that bishop to f3 mating pattern, and Carlsen could have won with the nice fork, but both of them missed it. In the end, it's a draw. So a fair result and a good game for them, and I do hope you enjoyed it as well. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Do check out the podcast today. Like I said, the link is in the description below. First thing you will see, so do check it out. It's the first time I'm premiering a video, so you are even able to chat with other people before the premiere actually starts. So it's I don't know. I've never used it, but it seems like a nice feature. And yeah, I would also like to thank Genazaret Berokal, Rafael Shakarami, Alessio Pataka, Luc de Montigny, and Oliver Beck for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon. Continuing the coverage of the Morphy saga when I manage, as there's simply too much going on at the moment. Continuing the coverage of the Steinitz Memorial and whatever else happens in the chess world. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Saturday.